I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we go behind the headlines to report on news and information the mainstream media doesn't want you to know about. We try to recover some lost history and explain the inexplicable. And when it comes to recovering lost history and explaining the inexplicable, today I'm going to focus on our border and what's going on our southern border. You see, I have 41 years of experience working on borders. That's a long time. As a freshly minted second lieutenant in the Army, all the way back in 1983, I had experience working on the U.S., or actually the Arizona-Mexico border. I then went to Germany, was assigned there for a number of years, and worked on the east-west German border with the 3rd Armored Division and the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in the Fulda Gap, the place where World War III never happened. And I did that both working in a border resident office, conducting debriefings of folks that had crossed, but also patrolling the border there. And I've also been to Berlin. I've also worked on borders in Panama, in Guatemala, and Honduras. So over those years, I've got lots and lots of experience when it comes to what borders are, how they're enforced, both the physical barrier and structure itself, but also the enforcement, how you handle the movement of people back and forth. And so when I talk to you today, it's not just something like many people in D.C. or New York, L.A., they all have opinions, and opinions are wonderful things. But I have 40 years of practical experience when it comes to borders and how they operate. And so what I'm going to talk about today is, I think it's kind of a novel approach to what Biden and Mayorkas have done to our border. You see, the United States, like Russia, is not a party to the International Criminal Court, the ICC. But that didn't prevent President Joe Biden from endorsing the ICC's war crimes indictment of Russian President Vladimir Putin back in March 2023. You understand why that would happen, because of course Putin launched an invasion of Ukraine. But Biden, in this case, acknowledged that the ICC, that the court's authority, although not recognized by Russia or the United States, Biden still said that he thought that it makes a very strong point about Putin's indictment, and that Putin had clearly committed war crimes. So let's pause for a second and just examine that in the last few days, the ICC has issued indictments, or is trying to issue indictments for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu, which is preposterous because he's a wartime leader trying to defend his country from a terrorist attack, but also against Hamas leaders. So the ICC is kind of a political animal, and their goal is that they seek is really the end of impunity of people who are perpetrating crimes against the international community, crimes against humanity, that kind of thing. So Putin's indictment came as a result of his attack or his offensive into Ukraine. Everyone understands that. But when it comes to Biden, what if the tables were turned? Let's pause again and just think about something. What if lawfare, the kind of lawfare that's been brought against President Trump, what if the same sort of lawfare was applied, I think legitimately, against President Biden? Trump's being railroaded. He's being treated like a third world victim of, a totalitarian government. It's a banana republic situation. But in the case of Biden, there are some real differences. So let's just, as a thought experiment, let's examine what the situation would be if the tables were turned and President Biden was subjected to an investigation and an indictment by the ICC. See, under President Biden, human beings are broken on the hard, sharp edge of the U.S.-Mexico border. Every single day that goes on. Borders, by definition, are very dangerous places. And Biden's border is certainly just such a place. He told the American people that his administration would run the border in a humane, fair, and orderly way. And absolutely none of those things are true. Biden's decisions and orders could easily result in his indictment for crimes against humanity. What would those counts be? If the ICC brought an indictment against Biden, what would those counts look like? Well, Biden's border is a place of murder, enslavement, torture, rape, and other insanely inhumane acts. The Biden administration lost 85,000 children. That number is probably even higher now. God knows it could be over 100,000 children. But the Biden administration, they've lost these kids and there's no accountability. And Congress gave a week or two of attention to it, and they're still gone. Those kids are just somewhere in the U.S. God knows they're being exploited. Hundreds of thousands of children have been forced into labor. And that isn't just my opinion. That's a long investigative report by no less than the New York Times, which is essentially like Pravda or Izvestia when it comes to being an organ, a news reporting organ of the Biden administration. So if the New York Times says that hundreds of thousands of kids are being exploited for purposes of labor, you can imagine how really bad it is. Biden has directed and overseen the deliberate, systematic deconstruction of the U.S. border, its security, the immigration and laws and policies around that. Biden's border will be remembered as the iconic symbol representing his administration's willful neglect of basic human values and really sliding into an abyss of the mass exploitation and degradation of human beings. It is horrific. And those are the crimes against humanity that I'm talking about. A legitimate ICC would look at what Biden has done and would see that litany of crimes and would consider or actually take action on indicting him. Remember, nothing crosses the U.S.-Mexico border without the consent of Mexican criminal cartels. Biden's decisions and orders subsidize cartel human smuggling and trafficking operations. Neither he personally nor his senior executives are ignorant of that. It's a legally well-established fact. Biden masquerades as a compassionate humanitarian, welcoming millions of newcomers into the United States. But in reality, he's really a flesh peddler. He is bent on increasing the numbers for the 2030 census as an advantageous electoral college gimmick and issuing Social Security numbers as fast as he can to encourage illegal alien voter registrations in time for the November 5th, 2024 general election. The weekly Social Security numbers issued in Texas alone are staggering. Over 225,000 just in the last week of March 2024. Think about that. Just stop and think about why the issuance of Social Security numbers is so important. Because very often that's all you would need to get on the voter rolls and present yourself as a lawful voter. And people are encouraged to do it. There's been untold reporting. You can see it if you hop on X and just scroll through. You can see how persons who unlawfully enter the United States are encouraged to vote. And when they're issuing, in the state of Texas alone, 225,000 Social Security cards to people, there's a reason. It's not an accident. So that's only half the equation, really, if you think about it. The other half of the equation is the impact on American citizens who have suffered from the consequences of Biden's decisions. Just look at Biden's first year in office. 60 homicide or manslaughter convictions were attributed to illegal immigrants in 2021. That's a 1,900% increase from the previous year. Illegal immigrants committed 1,178 assaults and domestic violence crimes in 2021. And that represents more than a 400% increase from about 208 back in 2020. These are tragic, anecdotal press reports. I mean, look at the example of Laken Riley. She becomes sort of people pause and look at that and say, this is a horrific instance. But sadly, there's actually many, many other Laken Rileys out there. But it doesn't get reported. It doesn't get the same coverage. Or it's a news bubble. It's popular or it's something that's discussed for a period of whether it's days or weeks, but then it fades from memory. The upward criminal trend of criminal arrests of illegal aliens is indisputable. I'm going to run through some numbers slowly for you. So in 2020, criminal illegal alien arrests, about 2,500, little under that. In 2021, 10,763. So look at that jump from the end of the Trump era into Biden. It's almost 5 times the number. 2022, it's 12,000. 2023, just over 15,000 arrests. And just the first really 2.5 months of 2024, the pace again is being outstripped, at least 5,600 arrests. The past 3 years and 4 months of Biden's displacement and relocation program have caused an unlawful migration shift that is charitably calculated at more than 7.2 million people. That is a population, and hold on for a second, just think about this. That is a population greater than 36 of our 50 states and almost every major American city. Add to that figure an additional 1.8 million gotaways. Now hold on, the gotaways are people that Border Patrol and ICE and the other law enforcement agencies, those are the ones that they know evaded them and avoided any kind of apprehension or processing. So 1.8 million gotaways. So if those are the ones that they know, imagine the number of those that they're not even aware of. So they evaded law enforcement and they entered the United States. That's a total of about 9 million people. That 9 million people, that's a mass migration second only to the partition between India and Pakistan in 1947. And that resulted in a displacement of about 14 million Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims. So just pause for a second and think about this. The largest human migration forced for political purposes is India splitting with Pakistan in 1947. The Biden administration is in second place, and they've only been in office for 3 years, going on 4. And so the scale, the movement of persons, this huge migratory shift is all on Biden. And you have to think about all the criminality associated with it. I just went through a long list of numbers for you. But think of the cost, the human impact on both the migrants who are unlawfully entering the country and all the crimes that come from that, and then how Americans are affected. The total actual number of people that have unlawfully entered the U.S. is estimated by analysts, and this is an unofficial number, but somewhere between 16 and 20 million people. No one really knows the real number. All done with a few strokes of Biden's pen. In fact, the very first few strokes that he made as president back in January 2021. Biden's decisions and actions are not a policy dispute. This is not an argument over who's got a better tax rate. These are criminal actions affecting millions of people. Congress is either unwilling or unable to impeach and remove Biden. And we all know what happened to Mayorkas. Impeached in the House, and Chuck Schumer in the Senate wouldn't even take it up. That decision not to even take up the Mayorkas impeachment was a gut punch to Americans living along the border. The damage that was done to their morale and their belief in the system, it's corrosive. So, for whatever reason, we have failed to follow the political process. And so there has to be some kind of justice, and maybe that justice is the ICC. If Biden believes that the ICC is justified for indicting Putin for war crimes, should Biden also join the ranks of Slobodan Milosevic of Yugoslavia and face the terror and brutality of what he has wrought? The ICC prosecutor can initiate an investigation or prosecution proprio motu, which means on his own initiative, on the basis of information received from reliable sources. I guarantee you, there are hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people able to bring evidence against Biden. The human suffering and consequences of what Biden has done has yet to be tallied. It'll take decades, I think. But Biden, in this case, should be indicted by the ICC. The evidence against him and his systemic, brutal exploitation of migrant populations. Remember, he's doing this in cooperation with cartels, transnational criminal organizations, and other corrupt politicians. Look, and it's all for Biden's accretion of personal and political power, and really enrichment. It's overwhelming. It is time for Biden to be held accountable for his border crimes. So everything I've talked about in the last few minutes is actually part of an op-ed piece that will be coming out in the Washington Times. So my colleagues here will connect that op-ed to this video. But I want you to understand that the points that I've run through in this particular monologue with you, the data stands for itself. It's all fact-checked. We'll link in all the articles to show you where we get the information from. It's objective. They're government records or they're studies that have been conducted by reputable organizations. But I'm trying to give you the context of my experience. And 40 years later, on borders all over the world, borders, it's a physical contact point between cultures and countries. There's a reason why there are borders. And people are often either dying to defend those borders or dying to get across those borders. And in this case, we've got a real criminal enterprise operating on our southern border in a human trafficking operation, the scale of which no one's ever seen. And it's not an accident. And Biden and Mayorkas both, in my view, are on the hook for it. And so I just want you to understand that Judicial Watch, for the last 20 years, I started looking at the border in 2003 for Judicial Watch. And for the last 21 years, I guess now, every single year, I've gone down to that border. And I've run it from Gulf Coast to the Pacific Ocean. There's probably a mile or two that I haven't stood on, but those are few and far between. I've run that border from end to end, and I've reported on it for 21 years, and I'm telling you that there is no border, and that it's a deliberate, willful deconstruction, that Biden and Mayorkas both are on the hook for it, and that even in the case of our political leaders in Washington, when they fail to act, at some point there's got to be some kind of justice. And there's people that look at the ICC and say, no way, they're a lefty-dominated kind of organization. I guess I'm offering that as an idea just to prompt the notion that there's got to be a court of justice that examines this thing. If the Biden administration and Garland and the Justice Department are going to go after President Trump with these 4 phony cases, whether at the state level or at the federal level, and there's no immunity for him, and he's subject to whatever they dream up, and 9/10 of everything that they say is just absolute lie, and the 1/10 that's left over is an exaggeration. How about real criminality? How about real lives that are destroyed and the consequences to be paid for that? And that's what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for people that deliberately and willfully break the law and endanger human lives having their day in court and being called to account under a justice system. So think about that. Let me know what you think. You can write to us at info@judicialwatch.org. And I encourage you to communicate with us. Tell us what you think. It may be a long shot, but I think it's important that we document these things, because whether it's next year or 10 years from now, someone will come back to you and say, oh, it never happened. And we don't want that to happen. That's why we try to recover lost history and explain the inexplicable here. We try to be sort of a memory bank for things that have occurred and hold people to account. I'm Chris Farrell, on Watch.